Hey, it's me again. Let's get back to the slideshow about metaethics. So this is the slide we ended with. I'm going to show you the PowerPoint. It's a little easier to move through. I think it looks a little crisper than the Google slideshow, but the Google slideshow has been shared with you. You can watch it. You can look at it, open it up in your Google Drive. I've shared it with you on email. If you have trouble finding it, just let me know. But this is the PowerPoint version of it. This is where we ended up with these 4 examples. And I was trying to think about the different metaethical views, the spectrum, right? So let's kind of come back to them. The subjectivist has the intuition that many of our should statements, many of our judgments that sound like moral claims or value judgments, are really just expressions of subjective preference. So like, you should eat your Wheaties. It doesn't have any real moral content to it. It's a should statement that depends entirely for its legitimacy on your personal preferences. So it's a purely subjective claim. If all moral judgments were like that, then that would support relativism, subjectivism in particular. Okay. The second claim, you should bury the dead, expresses a value judgment that is relative to a culture. Many cultures practice burial of the body or the cremated remains. So in those cultures, that's the norm, that's the ideal, that's how we ought to treat the dead. And so it makes sense, if you encountered someone whose loved one died and they refused to bury the body, right? It makes sense to say that, well, you really should spend the money. It's something you ought to do. That's the custom here. That's also the ideal. It's a moral ideal, but it's a moral ideal that is relative to a culture. Not all cultures practice that ritual of how to mourn the dead. So the should there, it is a culturally relative should. It applies to those groups of people who belong to that culture and respect those norms and live by those ideals. For those people, it really is true that you should bury the dead. And what gives that claim authority, right? Custom, local custom, and sort of the idea that you should respect local customs. The second pair of examples, though, moves in the direction of some form of objectivism. It seems like the claim that you should keep your promises, of course we can read it as a merely subjective claim. It only applies if you want to, or if you have a preference for keeping promises. We could also hear it as a culturally relative claim, right? Some cultures value promise keeping more than others, and so the should only applies to those cultures that value promise keeping, right? So if you live in a culture that doesn't value promise keeping, there's no sense to be made of the claim that you should do so. But well, that's one way of reading it. If the cultural relativist can't explain in the right sort of way why you should keep your promises, it's just a matter of cultural preference, then that seems to be a limitation of the view. Same with the claim that women should enjoy the same basic rights as men. Okay. Notice the nihilist wants to say that none of these claims are based in reality at all. There's no basis for should claims at all. That morality is just a fiction or an expression of emotion. So when you say that you should keep your promises, you're just expressing some kind of emotional attitude toward people who break promises. Okay, so what is the appeal of relativism? Why be a relativist? Well, one thing to say in defense of relativism is it sort of starts with the observation that morality is a human construction and that it applies to us. At least this is an argument you could make, and an appealing argument to many people. Now, the fact that morality is a human construction that only applies to humans does rule out the idea that there are moral truths that would be true even if human beings didn't exist at all. And so maybe one of the correct observations of the relativist is that the very existence of morality depends on human beings, and there would be no moral standards without human beings. But it doesn't follow from that that all moral standards are relative in the sense that the relativist means. Okay, but relativism does, kind of come from this observation that morality is a human construction. Notice that if you believe that morality comes from God, that's an anti-relativist stance. But just because morality doesn't come from God, just because it is a human construction, it doesn't follow that morality is either purely subjective or culturally relative. There could still be objective moral standards that apply to all humans, even though we are the source of morality in some sense. Okay. Secondly, a simple, scientifically respectable explanation of what morality is. This is something that relativism gives us. It offers a simple, scientifically respectable explanation of morality. Morality just describes tendencies of human beings to approve and disapprove of certain actions and certain customs and certain practices. And so we can give an anthropological account, maybe even a biological account of why human beings approve of some practices more than others. So there's nothing mysterious about morality. It just describes human customs and attitudes of approval and disapproval. If that's what you think morality is, that's all that it's about, then that's one reason to support relativism. However, again, I think you can defend an objective account of morality that is scientifically respectable. So I think that's possible to do. Relativism also gives us a simple explanation of what is required for moral knowledge, and this is thought to be part of its appeal. If you want to know what the right thing to do is or what the wrong thing to do is, all you have to do is study the customs and norms of your culture. Or, if you're a subjectivist, you just have to ask, like, what are your preferences, right? If I desire to lie, then that makes lying okay. And so all I have to know is like what I desire, what I value, what I believe. And then I know what the difference between right and wrong is. That's the subjectivist account. The relativist account, the cultural relativist account, is that, in order to know the difference between right and wrong, I just have to know the customs and the ideals and the codes of my society. And so the right thing to do is just to live in accordance with those customs. And wrong is just defined in terms of what my society disapproves of. That is a simple explanation. Again, it's not clear that it's a point in favor of the relativists, because you might think that moral knowledge is more complicated than that it's a harder task, right? That figuring out the difference between right and wrong takes more than just, knowing what your society approves of and disapproves of. It requires some judgment on your part. Relativism is thought to be egalitarian. This is another appeal of the view. The idea that there are no moral experts, that in principle everyone can be a good judge of morality. And this is certainly an appeal of the view, right? I think most philosophers want to get away from the idea that morality is a kind of expertise that only some people have access to, right? So the opposite of egalitarianism is elitism. And I think certainly it's hard to defend a moral view that leads to the conclusion that only a select few people know the difference between right and wrong, or that it requires a specific kind of moral, expertise. That's only available to the highly educated or to some elite class. Like, that's not the direction we want to go in. Any theory of morality and what it's about should be egalitarian in the sense that it should be a kind of knowledge that is that anyone is capable of acquiring. However, the idea that everyone is an excellent judge of morality just doesn't seem on the face of it true, right? There are some people, not because they're uneducated, not because they're incapable of knowing the difference between right and wrong, but they have lived their lives in such a way that they have forgotten, or they kind of are out of touch with moral reality. And so they are bad judges of morality, right? I mean, I don't know, take Ted Bundy in Heathwood's essay. It's not Ted Bundy is incapable of acquiring moral knowledge, but that he hasn't done the work, right? He's not the person you'd go to for moral advice. He doesn't seem like a good judge of morality. So that's maybe an easy example, but that's maybe a problem for relativism. It's, on the one hand, egalitarianism is good, but maybe they take it too far. And lastly, relativism acknowledges and accepts cultural difference. This is a virtue. Of course, part of living a good life is acknowledging difference and tolerating difference or respecting other people's views. This is part of what it means to be a good person. Presumably, it's part of what contributes to a thriving, flourishing life. Right? Closed-mindedness is not thought to be a path to happiness or well-being. However, the fact that I acknowledge and accept cultural difference is not all by itself a reason to believe that everybody is right about what they think, or that everybody has the correct moral view. I can respect you and disagree with you. I could acknowledge the importance of cultural difference and still think that one culture is in closer touch with the moral truth than another. That's at least a consistent view, a coherent view, right? So acceptance of cultural difference, tolerance, is compatible with disagreement and the idea that you sort of fight for what you believe is correct. So it's complicated. On the one hand, there are genuine appeals of relativism, but maybe the view, what draws people to relativism doesn't require being a relativist. That's sort of Gensler's argument, right? That there are appeals of relativism, but you can be accepting of others and respect cultural difference without being a relativist. That's kind of his argument. Okay, problems for the view, and again, I don't want to run out of time here. We don't have much time left. I can only go 15 minutes with these videos. So here's some problems. You can look at the Schaefer-Landau essay to look at the chapter 19 in Schaefer-Landau to think about this in more detail. But okay, one problem, it seems to make individuals or societies morally infallible. So let's take the example of cultural relativism. If moral standards are defined by what your society approves of, or what are the codes and ideals of your society, then that suggests that your society is always right with respect to itself, right? But there's no grounds for questioning or criticizing the moral ideals of your own society. That seems like a problem, right? Because it seems like any society is fallible. Societies make mistakes, just like individuals make mistakes. So this is a potential problem for relativism. Relativism also seems to eliminate the basis for moral disagreement, which I was talking about earlier. We genuinely disagree, right, about moral claims. For example, cultures generally disagree about whether women should enjoy the same basic rights as men. There is genuine cultural disagreement on that question. And we can engage in a debate about whether one society should be allowed to treat women unequally, right? Because like that's the cultural norm there. And that makes it acceptable because of different cultural norms. That's a legitimate disagreement. And both sides of the disagreement have to sort of take each other seriously and respect each other. But the objectivist wants to say that dispute can in principle be resolved, right? That there's an argument to be made on behalf of defending the rights of women, even in a culture that doesn't respect the rights of women in the same way. But relativism seems to lead to the view that there's no point in moral disagreement because all moral views are morally equivalent. So everyone's view is equally plausible as everyone else's, or every society's moral code is equally good as any other society's moral code. But that just means that like from that it follows that there's no point to moral argument. There's no point to moral debate because there's no way of, in principle, resolving those debates. Again, that seems like a problem for the view. We've already talked about the fact that it doesn't leave room for questioning your own, the guiding ideals of your own society, right? That's related to the infallibility of society, right? If society is infallible, then you have no grounds for questioning your own basic commitments or questioning the guiding ideals of your society. So that seems like a problem. Right? Any moral view should leave open the possibility of being wrong. And from this, it follows that moral progress doesn't really seem to be possible. That, for example, when a society goes from discriminating against women to opening up more freedom for women, right? We want to say that society has progressed morally, has gotten better, but relativism has no way of explaining why one society is better than another. And in that, it also leads to a kind of problem of contradiction, or it contradicts itself. You can think about why. That's the last problem that you can think about on your own. Okay, I'm running out of time. We'll see you next week. Bye.